Our next panel is on how we secure the green recovery, and we now move on to look at that in detail. And as we've seen at the COP26 conference in recent days, there are few issues more urgent or more important for society and the economy here in the UK and more broadly around the world. And our industry clearly has a key role to play in helping to address and seize these challenges in the years and the decades ahead. And we are enormously fortunate to have a terrific panel looking at that, led by Elizabeth Stone, the co-leader of ESG for Financial Services UK at PwC. Can you please welcome Elizabeth and her panel to the stage? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today, chairing the panel on securing a green recovery. I've managed to do a fail on the technology already, Letitia. I might need some help with the iPad. So we heard a lot this morning already, and Miles just made the point about the importance of the financial services sector in relation to the role it plays in the green recovery. And Carol from Britain Thinks this morning talked about the dramatic change in some of her survey feedback, where, if you look back 5 years, it perhaps wasn't even mentioned in the research that she did, and this year it's sort of front and centre. And then obviously in his opening remarks this morning, Sir Alan Montague talked about the UK numbers required, so the 90 billion required to meet or finance the UK's net zero commitments to 2050. So what we wanted to do in the panel session this afternoon is really think about how we actually deliver on some of those commitments, both from the UK government and more broadly from business, and then what challenges and opportunities they represent for the financial services sector. What I wanted to do actually was have two poll questions, and Isabel very kindly asked the first one, and that was really just getting your reactions to the commitments made at COP26. So we will capture those responses, and I'll get the panel to comment on those. And then I think equally importantly is to get your views on the policy framework that underpins some of those commitments. So particularly talking about the UK Sustainable Finance Roadmap. So there's a second polling question on that. And we'll come on to that while I ask the panellists to do some introductions. So perhaps Michael, I'll start with you.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Michael Collins. My day job is Director of Government Affairs at M&G plc. And M&G, as many of you will know, is both an asset owner and an asset manager. As Director of Government Affairs, increasingly that job essentially amounts to following ESG and sustainability policy. It's right at the heart of what we do as a business, and it's right at the heart of the policy agenda. I also have the privilege of chairing the ESG committee of the IRSG, the International Regulatory Strategy Group, which is a kind of joint venture by TheCityUK and the corporation, bringing together the whole of the financial services industry to look at sustainability and ESG issues. So I'm really delighted to have the chance, Elizabeth, to share some thoughts with you and the colleagues on the panel this afternoon.
Thanks, Michael. Jeremy.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jeremy Hayward. I'm Lloyds Banking Group's ambassador for the Southwest. I'm based in Bristol. My day job is with responsibility for thinking of our whole customer agenda, but I also have this role as ambassador for the Southwest. And I guess my interest from this perspective, from a group perspective, clearly sustainability is pretty much number one in terms of where we're looking to focus from putting the organisation behind it, both internally and what we do with our clients and customers. But me particularly, I'm very interested in how a national agenda and then particularly a regional agenda work side by side. And I think it's absolutely fair to say that the challenges and the opportunities for the regions around the UK are very, very different. There certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all. In the Southwest, actually, we have a good balance of both challenge and opportunity because of the nature of our industries and also the foundations we've got from a skills perspective and a capability perspective. Not the same for every region, and therefore how national policy work alongside what the regions need to do to take those opportunities is a big area for interest for me, and I'd be interested to see how we bring it out today.
So good afternoon, my name is Lakshmi Murthy, delighted to be here. I'm part of BNP Paribas in the UK. In particular, I'm the Managing Director and CEO for our vehicle leasing business. So this is the arm of BNP Paribas through which we finance and lease cars, vans, etc. to businesses big and small as well as to individuals. So obviously, like many other large leading banks and financial institutions, at BNP we strongly believe that we have a positive role to play in accelerating the path to sustainability, both by promoting positive actions as well as mitigating the impact of negative actions. And we can talk about how we take that forward in terms of policies, governance, accountability and all that. But in particular, in my role as the MD for a vehicle leasing business, as you can imagine, decarbonization of transport is a big goal for the UK. When we know that 10% of emissions emanate from road transport, decarbonizing transport is a big strategic goal for the UK. And you might, this afternoon, you'll hear from me several examples of how, as a leading financial institution, we have a role to play in supporting decarbonization of transport in my day job. So this is a very topical discussion, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Thanks, Lakshmi. James.
My name's James Wilde. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at the Phoenix Group. I joined Phoenix Group about 7 or 8 months ago, and the organisation has a purpose of helping people secure a life of possibilities. It's the UK's largest long-term savings and retirement business. We've got 13 million customers and over 300 billion of assets under administration. And that's why I joined the group, actually. I was previously at Lloyds Banking Group, where I led on sustainability, and prior to that I worked with governments around the world and financial institutions on climate change for around 20 years. But I joined the finance industry because of what we've been hearing today. It's a pivotal moment. Finance has a critical role in driving the transition to a low-carbon economy. And at Phoenix, there's a real commitment to align that 300 billion to a green recovery. It makes absolute financial sense, as we've heard before. It's capital intensive, it's job intensive. It creates the industries of tomorrow so that the UK can lead globally on some of the new technology areas we need, like offshore wind or hydrogen. But it's also fantastic from a levelling up perspective. One can create those industrial clusters of these new markets, but also create the infrastructure we need, like electrical vehicle infrastructure, but also deal with things like fuel poverty by rolling out energy efficiency across social housing. So we've made a real big commitment at Phoenix Group to use our 300 billion, our patient capital, to support the green recovery.
Thanks, James. I'm going to ask the panellists just to comment on the responses to this first question, but Letitia, perhaps we could have the second one because I've noted down the answers. And just in terms of the polling that we had for this question, so probably no surprise, actually. I probably didn't word the first response that well. But yes, the commitments demonstrated the growing momentum and focus for concrete climate action and transparency among governments and the business community. So we only had 2% backing that one. 66% were saying possibly, but more to be done, and agreeing with Boris Johnson's statement about avoidable disaster still hangs in the balance. And then close to a third, science still indicates that we are facing the real threat of 2.4 degrees climate change by 2100. Perhaps starting with you, Lakshmi, just in terms of your reaction and where you might sit on that A, B and C.
Yeah, I think with the majority of the audience, progress has been made. Whether it's enough or not is the big question. And I think invariably, when you bring together people from almost 200 countries and ask them to agree on something, you probably can't get everything you want. So has COP26 achieved everything one would hope for? Maybe not. Has it achieved more than what we'd expect? Possibly. And I think important progress has been made, whether it's having a clear articulation on coal and fossil fuels. So again, I think what's important is to take the commitments made, make sure we accelerate the delivery of those commitments, and hold businesses and governments accountable for delivering on those commitments. I think That's the most important focus now rather than saying, should we have achieved more?
And James, where would you be on
Yeah, I agree with the wisdom of the crowd. I think real progress has been made, actually. I'm very much glass half full. Just after Paris, we were on track for a 3.7 degree C world. After COP26, we're closer to 2.4. But what's really important is that there's agreement that we should try and strengthen national pledges in the next year. If I look back to 2009 and the Copenhagen Agreement, the last time there was a really big acceleration of interest, the negotiations fell down and there was a depression afterwards in terms of a focus on climate change. And I really don't see that this time. I think what's really important as well, I've been to 5 or 6 COPs, and at this COP, I mean, it's being positioned as the business COP, or even I've heard people talk about it as the finance COP. The presence of business, the number of CEOs were there was unprecedented. The big announcements, things like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero with 130 trillion committing to align investment portfolios and lending portfolios to net zero is incredibly powerful. It's private finance that's going to do the heavy lifting. As was just said, it's the underlying detail that's exciting, the initiatives that are talked about. I was involved in creating something called Mission Innovation, which was one of the big initiatives announced at the COP, which is about creating a global market for the new technologies we need, and governments committing to invest far more in innovation and collaborating on the new technologies we need. So I have to say, I'm rather excited. And I think what's also powerful, and it's come up quite a lot today, is just the general momentum. You know, there's a real appreciation of the science, a concern about the increasing effects of climate change, but also just the social focus on this. I happened to get caught in the demonstration with 100,000 young people on Friday, and there was a fantastic atmosphere, but you get that sense of energy that people want change, and that's going to help governments make those changes and make those pledges real. So I'm very, very buoyant.
Yeah, I think when I was crafting the responses, I was sort of leaning perhaps myself, because I think it was a momentum point that I was really excited about. That I think someone made the point this morning that actually the public is probably further ahead than quite a lot of policymakers and business and driving change, and I think that's a sea change from perhaps where we were. Letitia, I don't know whether it's possible to get the second polling question up. And this is really just in relation to, as I said, the UK Sustainable Finance Roadmap. And I was interested to perhaps get Jeremy and Michael's views on this. So the question was, is it ambitious enough to maximise the ability for the financial services sector to help secure a global recovery? So option A was, yes, it will help position the UK as a world leader in global sustainability finance markets. B was, yes, but the roadmap for implementation and overlap with other initiatives such as the EU SFDR and EU taxonomy create too much complexity and uncertainty for business. And no, it doesn't contain sufficient detail on what will drive innovative climate solutions and financial and taxation incentives to promote change at both the business and consumer level. So quite a long response there. Michael, perhaps just getting your sense of...
Yeah, I think I'd probably be in Group B as well. This Sustainable Finance Roadmap that the Treasury published back in October was absolutely a necessary part of the story. We needed that post-Brexit statement from UK government of what the vision was for taking sustainable finance forward. I think the work of the GTAG, the Green Advisory Group, has really helped the Treasury to get a sense of what the issues are in sustainable finance. But at the end of the day, all that we have now is a document and a roadmap. What we actually need is the hard delivery, and I'm slightly concerned that if one looks at the roadmap, some of the timelines, some of the deadlines for delivery are a little bit vague. In the conversations that we've had with the Treasury, they've admitted that they still don't know when they'll get parliamentary time for some of the legislation that's actually necessary, and indeed the pressure from other stakeholders, including employees, and firms' own sense of what's right means that an awful lot is happening anyway. But we do need an underpinning regulatory framework. We do need the rules, the requirements placed on issuers to ensure that we can actually do our job. So it's a great start. I think the Treasury now takes this seriously as an agenda in a way that it certainly didn't when I worked in the Treasury 10 or 15 years ago. But we absolutely need to double down on the delivery, and the timelines that are in there have got to be met, and I think in many cases, frankly, accelerated.
Thanks, Michael. And Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Michael. I guess today I'm probably in the middle camp, but the clock's ticking and could quite easily go into the bottom camp if there isn't that delivery. And I think that momentum and the desire for something which gives a really strong framework for which businesses can operate to is there. And I agree with Michael, it's not stopping businesses moving forward. There's a huge desire. There's let's be clear, there's a huge economic opportunity associated with sustainability that businesses are keen to take. But when making investments, you want to know that your path is as positive as it can be. And that, for this, absolutely requires government policy and clarity of policy for people to know the environment they're working to. So, yeah, it's good. You're much closer to it in terms of the timeline. It's good they've got to that point, but we can't wait forever for the clarity. And without it, it potentially will cause further levels of uncertainty, which of course impacts people's ability to plan and invest.
As one of the panellists said this morning on the diversity and inclusion panel, it's probably quite helpful to me that you've all answered B and C, because now I can ask you about some of the challenges in a little bit more detail. So, James, thinking about your comments in relation to the question I had around COP26 and various government and business commitments, in terms of some of the practical issues that you see coming out of that, do you want to elaborate on a bit more of your opening remarks?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk a bit about the challenges to drive investment in this space. We've been working with the ABI, and there is a big investment opportunity over the next 15 years. If the UK is going to reduce emissions by 78% versus 1990, you're talking about 2.7 trillion of investment. And actually, the long-term savings and retirement industry could provide a third of that, so 900 billion, about 60 billion a year. But there are real barriers to that investment flowing. I think the first, as Jeremy just said, actually, is long-term stable policy that can drive investment. I think the second is technology risk and increased cost. Some of the technologies we're talking about are higher cost now or higher upfront cost, which is a barrier. I think another barrier is just the investable pipeline, the opportunities and the customer demand being there. And linked to that is actually just the broader awareness, understanding, trust and ease of some of the solutions being taken up, whether that might be for an SME trying to think about how do I improve my energy efficiency. There's real behavioural barriers that need to be overcome. So there's real challenges, but I think if we get it organised and we collaborate with government and other stakeholders, it's possible to drive change. And I think offshore wind is a beautiful example of what's possible. Just 5 or 6 years ago, the cost of offshore wind was £150 per megawatt hour. The cost now is £40 per megawatt hour. And that's been driven by a really stable policy regime that gives us a constant offtake price for the power, support for innovation, and the scale of the technology is just unbelievable. I was involved in the Renewable Innovation Review in 2003. At that point, we thought they were 1 megawatt each wind turbine. We thought they could possibly get to 3. Now they're at 15 or 16 megawatts per turbine. They're as big as skyscrapers. They're massive. The industry's been able to scale up hugely. We're talking about huge farms, mass economies of scale, but really importantly, actually, the cost of capital's gone down significantly because of the de-risking of the technology. And long-term private capital's come in, that patient capital that we've got at Phoenix Group. So if you can sort out the end-to-end policy and market issues for technologies like we have in offshore wind, where we're now a global leader, there's real potential. And we essentially need to do that collaboratively across each of the big opportunity spaces in the UK.
Thanks, James. And Michael, when you were commenting on the sustainability roadmap, I'd really like to draw out some of your comments around sort of the interaction with sort of global regulation and the complexities that you see there as a challenge, and any thoughts and perspective you have there based on your background.
Yeah, there's clearly a huge amount that the UK can do domestically to set the right policy framework, not just in the kind of corporate sector and the real economy, but in the finance sector in this area of sustainability and ESG. But if we're really going to crack the challenges, particularly of climate change, but I would say of the broader environmental and social phenomena, then we really want, as much as possible, an internationally coherent and convergent approach, because the last thing we want is capital being locked behind national borders simply because regulators in country A have got a slightly different definition than that's deployed by regulators in country B. We cannot afford the narcissism of small differences in this area. The challenge that we've got, not just in the UK, not just in Europe, but globally, is too great to allow us to spend so long arguing over these issues of technicality. So I'm encouraged that the UK roadmap places quite a lot of emphasis on the international agenda. There's a whole chapter in there on the need for international convergence. I really like the fact that the UK seems to be willing to place so much emphasis on the new Sustainability Standards Board that's being set up. The challenge always, though, will be in actually, not just in the UK, but in the European Union as well, and certainly in other markets, in people actually delivering internationally coherent and internationally convergent standards over time. We have this ambition right across the financial services regulatory sphere to have convergence and to have interoperable and equivalent regimes. How frequently do we actually get there? Not very. I really hope that in the field of sustainable finance, we will finally realize that what unites us and the scale of the challenge that we've got together is much more important than those small differences, those small national preferences and idiosyncrasies that, as I say, run that risk of locking capital behind national borders and making it harder, more expensive and more time-consuming for all of the firms that are represented here to actually deliver the flow of capital that's required.
Thanks, Michael. And Jeremy, we heard a lot this morning about the FCA's focus on regions and just the opportunities and talent in the southwest, and thinking about COP26 and the roadmap. Interested just to get your perspective with your regional hat on for Lloyds and what you're seeing on the ground.
Well, I mean, I think with everything, it's a balance of challenge and opportunity, isn't it? The challenge comes from thinking about, how a region, its economy is based and which areas it's based on. And certainly from a southwest perspective, when you look at the regional economy, it's not based in the old-fashioned heavy industries, manufacturing. The industries in general are ones that can actually face into the opportunity quite positively. Agriculture is a really interesting one. That faces a number of challenges, as I'm sure people are aware. But in general, you've got a fabric which should enable us to seize the opportunity. I think skills and the availability and desire for people to move into these new industries are there. I think we're above average in terms of the skill base within the Southwest, thinking from a sustainability perspective. But we, like most regions, have got an enormous way to go. I mean, the change requirement from a skill perspective is enormous. I think if you look at the construction industry generally, it's seen as something like 60% of skills are going to need to change. And I think, that scale of change, and it's replicated across all areas. If you think about car mechanics, what they do today is fundamentally different to what they're going to do in an electric vehicle world. You've got that scale of change, and the opportunity that creates economically in terms of facilitating it, the change requirement, as James talks about, is going to be needed. When you bring that together, it's fantastic. I think, I'm very thoughtful about the theme here around a sustainable recovery. And one of the things that we did about a year ago with our business customers was talk to them about some of the opportunities to have a sustainable recovery. And there was universal interest and universal support, but also universally a kind of a comment saying, actually, we just need to cope with surviving at the moment. Come back to us once we've sorted that out, and then we'll think about this agenda. And trying to get a combination working together that this is something that can enable that recovery is something that's probably lacking at the moment. People are not making that join. It's businesses which are able to think securely about the future that are thinking about this. The ones that are feeling a little bit vulnerable, they're retrenching and just really hunkering down and just trying to cope with the environment we're in, particularly with a potential economic downturn. So the policy frameworks which facilitate that do think about the different regional differences are going to be fundamental if you're going to overcome that barrier, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted to pick up on that last point actually with you, Lakshmi. So thinking about, we had 50% respond to option C for the last question, and just this sort of carrot versus stick and financial incentives, etc., that might be required to change business behaviour. And I know that you have a perspective on that.
Absolutely. So I firmly believe most people, individuals and businesses, see the need for change. And if nothing else, the pandemic has reminded us about how important this planet is and how we need to preserve it and protect it. Having said that, equally, Jeremy spoke about people just need to get through surviving today. And again, businesses big and small are still in a period of recovery. So I think we have various sticks. So when I think about London and the widening of the ULEZ zone, for example, that's a stick. What we often don't have enough of are incentives. And I firmly believe that today, the demand for sustainable products, so if I look at electrical vehicles, demand is there. There is a supply of cars, albeit right now we don't have enough cars anywhere in the world. But again, there is attractive electric vehicle options available. What we need are more incentives. And I'll give a very good example. Around 10% of new cars registered in the UK today are pure electric vehicles. But if you look at those in businesses registering cars, that number rises to almost 30%. So businesses are adopting electric vehicles far much at a higher pace than the average person in the population. And that's directly correlated with financial incentives. Currently, taxation on electric cars for businesses is very, very attractive. So this is an example about businesses can have the right intent, but a little nudge with the right financial incentive can get them moving to more sustainable products. And once we have them over there, people who drive an electric car don't go backwards. We don't go back to combustion engines. So I firmly believe incentives are needed in addition to the stick. And once we're on that road to sustainability, we can phase down the incentives, but we do need them right now.
Thanks, Lakshmi. I've had a couple of questions come through from the audience, and I might just ask one of them because it is a challenge for the industry and it's very topical, and see who wants to answer it. How do we avoid the risk of greenwashing or even just perceptions of greenwashing? So obviously you've been in the news a lot, so Michael, I look at you.
Yeah, I mean, part of the answer to this absolutely will be regulatory requirements to have a certain set of common standards, common definitions set out in law that provide a kind of baseline, if you like, for what a firm is allowed to claim about a product. It's no different in really in the financial services sector than it is in any other sector. In a previous life, I used to negotiate bits of environmental legislation at the EU level, and I spent a chunk of my time on creating the EU eco-label. These sorts of regulatory regimes are a necessary part, I think, of helping to ensure that greenwashing doesn't happen. But we absolutely won't be reliant entirely upon regulation. I think a great protection against greenwashing is the sort of transparency that I think now every financial services firm, both at the corporate level and at the product level, is already doing. There are huge numbers of stakeholders out there that are interested in and are following what firms are doing. And by being transparent about the sorts of investments that we're making, the sorts of policies that we're pursuing, we set all of ours out in our sustainability policy for the group as a whole. At the fund level, You can see the criteria that the fund's investing to. We're producing ever more data on things like carbon intensity. That enables our stakeholders, customers, regulators, media, civil society groups to hold us to account. So it's great that there'll be a regulatory framework, and I think that will be necessary. But I think the other pressures that we're under, the other incentives that we face, are really powerful and will squeeze greenwashing out very, very quickly from this market.
Thanks, Michael. I wanted to make sure we don't spend all our time on the challenges, but also focus on the opportunities. So, James, you mentioned in your earlier remarks the Glasgow Financial Alliance initiative in terms of the $130 trillion that various global financial organisations have committed to. Be interesting just to get your perspective on that in terms of what it actually means and how do we make it real in terms of actual portfolios. And then also had a separate question, and I don't know whether it's for you, Michael, or for Jeremy, in terms of what does that actually mean for a stewardship in terms of divest or helping persuade companies to move on net zero. So James, perhaps the first aspect.
Yeah, no, happy to. So all of those financial institutions that are part of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero have essentially signed up to align their portfolios to net zero through different membership initiatives. And for Phoenix, just to bring that to life, what we've done is set targets for decarbonising our investment portfolio for 2025 and 2030, so short-term targets. So by 2025, we want to reduce the emissions of 160 billion of assets, our liquid equity and credit, by 25%. And by 2030, we want to reduce the emissions by 50% of all of the assets where we have direct control, so about 250 billion. So all the financial institutions will be setting equivalent targets for their lending portfolios or their investment portfolios. And that's really powerful. I mean, we had Andy Briggs, our CEO, up at the COP, talking to the other CEOs of major financial institutions about the actions we're going to take now to drive that change. We can't wait for regulations to kind of come up with the best practice. I totally agree with what you said, but we need to estimate where we can, work out best practice measurement methodologies. But in terms of how we do it, there's three key levers for us. One is tilting the portfolios to make sure our investment portfolios to make sure that we're supporting the winners in each sector. The second is stewardship, and I'll let my colleague talk more about stewardship, but for us it's engage, encourage companies to do the right thing and have a net zero aligned strategy and exclude only as a last resort. And then finally, it's investing in the climate solutions. And that's everything from large-scale infrastructure like renewables and energy efficiency through to venture capital. We've got a £100 million VC fund to invest in the latest technologies and new business models. So they're the levers we'll pull.
And Michael, did you want to pick up on that stewardship point?
Yeah, so at M&G, we're both an asset owner and an asset manager, so we see kind of both sides of this story. And stewardship's always been a key part of what we've done as a long-term investor. And in a way, it crystallizes that whole stewardship concept when you're talking about ESG and sustainability. I think there's a whole range of different steps that you can take as an investor to pursue stewardship in the sustainability space. One of them is the kind of signaling effect. Don't underestimate the power of a large financial institution simply taking these public positions, signing up to the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance as we've done, the Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance. That sends a signal throughout the whole investment chain that change is coming, that we are operating in a different world. Second thing you can do as a steward, I think, is, and I've hinted at this already, is be absolutely transparent about what you're doing. Make sure that all of the data is provided so that, again, everybody in the investment chain can see the impact that you're having, that you're providing as much data as you can. But where the rubber really hits the road, of course, is that kind of active engagement that you can have. When you've got voting rights, use them. We are very active in collaborating with, coordinating with other investors so that we can have the maximum amount of impact that we can with the firms that we're investing in. For M&G, given that we're very big in the private asset space, that gives us another dimension to stewardship. We've just launched a new sustainable infrastructure fund, which will be investing directly in infrastructure projects and infrastructure companies that we we think are sustainable. And where stewardship comes into that is at an even deeper level, which is helping to design the funds in the first place in consultation with customers, with clients, so that you know that you're only going to be accessing the kinds of assets that people are interested in. But of course, you absolutely have to have the threat of divestment there as well. There has to be that stick. But it's not one that I think one wants to deploy too quickly, not least because if we think about ESG in the round and we think about the social dimension, we've actually got to help these companies and the communities that they support and the employees that they support to get better. Just pulling the plug on them may not actually be, in this broader sustainability and ESG perspective, the right thing to do. But you do need that stick there just in case.
Thanks, Michael. James, you mentioned the challenges around sort of technology risks and the cost risk associated with innovative technologies, and I guess also getting it to a stage where it's an asset that's an investable. And Lakshmi, I think really interested to get your perspective on the electric vehicle industry. Obviously, you know, look back 10, 15 years ago and where it was to where it is today in terms of scale and listed companies, etc. And sort of lessons from that journey that would be interesting to hear about. I mean, you've mentioned sort of taxation incentives already, but how you go from innovation to scale and the role that the financial sector can play in helping that journey.
Yeah, so I think indeed electric vehicles, and again I said I would draw upon my experience to translate it to wider learnings for financial services, huge opportunity. And as a bank, BNP Paribas, but I'm sure the other banks as well, are very involved in everything to do with helping automakers make that transition to electric vehicles, battery, power plants. We need a lot more infrastructure. So again, there's a huge opportunity for financial services to play in accelerating investments in green technology, especially in the automotive world. But there's also a second layer, and that second piece is today, and I think James mentioned, some of these technologies are still expensive. So an electric car is more expensive than an ICE car today. And one of the roles we can play in the financial services sector is making sure that access to those new technologies is more egalitarian. So again, most people cannot afford to buy an electric car outright, but through products like leasing, you're able to make it available to more people. Equally, people aren't comfortable with new battery technology. You don't want to buy a car and then find 3 years later technology has moved on and you're left with a car which is worth less because the technology is obsolete. So again, financial services can play a role by encouraging usage over ownership. And indeed, a lot of people who buy an electric car today will do it with some form of finance because they're not left holding the asset which they're not yet comfortable with. So I think whether it's investing upstream in the right technology with OEMs, etc., whether it's educating, informing customers, or whether it's helping businesses understand. So one of the things we often have to do with our large corporates is they say, okay, I'll lease 100 electric cars from you. What do I do about charging? So we actually work with them on how you can take your premises and fit chargers. So there's a whole journey to accompany businesses, consumers, as well as policymakers need support. One of the things I know that the Treasury is getting worried about is if we have all these electric cars, there's a huge hole in our finances from fuel duty. Now, dropping incentives would be wrong because we are on a good track and we'd arrest the momentum we have. So we need to find ways, innovative solutions for the Treasury to plug the hole it may have in its finances without taking away financial incentives for end users. So this is where I think as banks, as financial institutions, there are so many legs and so many levers we can work on to aid and encourage the move to sustainability. So I think we have a huge role to play, and I think we are playing it, and we have a huge role to continue.
Thanks, Lakshmi. And Jeremy, questions come through for you from the floor in terms of thinking about the regional opportunity for green finance and funding innovation.
Well, I mean, I think so many of the things that we talk about at a national level apply in the region as well. I guess the angle that I'd like to take, I think, you know, we've talked a lot here about the what and what we're trying to achieve and how that's been worked through. I think often the challenge for businesses is the how It's almost Lakshmi's point. And I think, you know, regionally what we see is a real desire for help. And I think organisations within financial services, you know, we a good example, making sure that our relationship teams are trained and really understand the opportunities and understand how to access the opportunities. And they can go and spread that information at a very much a local level, understanding the particular needs of the industries, but also the geography and the particular economic opportunities there is so important. And I think we see that not through just what we do, but through what a lot of organisations are doing. And we've really got to put a lot of effort into the how to encourage people to access and deliver the what, really. And the what is ultimately, yes, there's a huge amount of funding and investment available through all kinds of different sources, but being able to translate that into actual actions on the ground that you know, a factory operating in Taunton can take full advantage of needs that local knowledge combined with an understanding to create, you know, the fantastic combination that's going to deliver the results we want to see.
Thanks, Jeremy. I wanted to turn to another very important cohort, being investors and savers. And Isabel mentioned the PwC survey that was done last year, and I think you picked up the institutional statistics. But what was interesting in that survey was there was quite a marked difference between the attitude of institutional investors and retail investors to investing in sustainable products. And obviously it's changing very quickly. But it would be interested to get the panel's perspective on, is there more that the industry can do to promote retail investment savings in sustainable product? And throw it open to the floor, whoever wants to take that one.
I could say a bit. We've been doing quite a lot of market research to understand consumers' needs in terms of their pension and how sustainable it is. And what we find is that 85% of our customers expect us to invest responsibly regardless of the labelling of the fund, but they do expect equivalent returns to a counterfactual product. They don't want to sacrifice returns, and I think that's true for most sustainable products. And actually, when you look at it, most people aren't very engaged in their savings. Most people stick with the default, 98% or more stick with the default. So actually, if you really want to drive change, it's about integrating ESG into the default solution rather than creating fancy ESG solutions and then driving change with the principal amount, that 300 billion, rather than the options. So I think that's where we're going. But I think there's a huge opportunity off the back of that to engage customers on the impact their savings are having, to encourage them to engage more in their pension and save more, and help overcome the savings gap.
I just want to pick up on the point you made about sustainable investment and the financial return. And because I think the Britain Thinks research this morning suggested that a third of pension fund holders wanted to put money into sustainable product, but it wasn't quite clear to me whether that was irrespective of the financial return. And then you always do hear about this conflict between financial performance and sustainable product, and then fiduciary duties of trustees, fund managers, etc. And Michael, do you have a perspective on that? And how
the experience that I've had in the conversations I've had over the years with pension funds in this role and in others is that there are large numbers of pension funds. One thinks of the Dutch institutions, for example, maybe those in North America as well, particularly those that have got a kind of public sector origin to them, that absolutely get sustainability and in many respects actually have been driving the agenda. The pressure they were put under by policyholders, by their stakeholders, has fed through into the rest of the financial services sector. So there's nothing inherent in the pension world that makes sustainable investing difficult. In fact, you can probably argue the complete opposite is the case, because the long-term perspective that pension investors rightly have to take matches perfectly with the sort of long-term sustainability challenges that we've got. So, you know, those big pools of institutional capital, that I think for right now is where the real prize is. The other thing, and it was picked up in Isabel's comments, I think, is whether there'll be a generational shift. You know, are we going to see with every passing year the next generation being more and more active in wanting to not just understand, but actually police how their money is being invested. I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge for everybody in the financial services sector.
Thanks, Michael. They're flashing now to countdown to 1 minute. So, quick fire, one ask that you might have of policymakers or business to realise the ambitions of COP26.
Mine from government, very simple, reform Solvency II, the insurance regulatory regime, in a way that actually makes it easier and cheaper for us to deliver the kind of long-term sustainable investment agenda that we all want.
Be really clear what good looks like and enable people to be held to account on that basis.
Thanks, Jeremy. Lakshmi?
Clarity and foresight on incentives and no sudden changes. I think Isabel said, let's have the nerve to stick to the strategic intent. So we'd love to see that from policymakers as well.
And James?
I was going to say Solvency II, but to be different, I'm going to say collaborate. So government to collaborate with financial services, business and other stakeholders to create the end-to-end solutions we've been talking about today.
Thank you. Well, we're right on time, and I'd just like to ask you all to join me in thanking the fantastic panel. I think it's been a wonderful discussion, and thank you very much, everyone. It's been very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well done.
I'd just like to thank Elizabeth, Michael, Jeremy, Lakshmi and James for what's been a fascinating panel. I hope if he saw me, Michael forgave my smile when he mentioned Solvency II. Michael and I first met 10 years ago when I went to Brussels to lobby him about the dangerous impacts on green issues of Solvency II. And it's nice to see that it still remains a job creation scheme for regulators and industry lobbyists.